Hello and welcome to another topic analysis for the Lincoln-Douglas debate resolution for January-February 26, which is resolved: the possession of nuclear weapons is immoral. To start off, we'll be covering some main definitions in the resolution. To possess, or the possession of, basically means to own or have, and in this case, the possession of nuclear weapons is done by a country. So these are entire countries that possess these nuclear weapons. Possessing nuclear weapons is technically and definitionally different from their use or the processes necessary to assemble them. So although the resolution specifically talks about the morality of the possession of nuclear weapons, which is different from the use of nuclear weapons and the means to acquire these nuclear weapons, the morality of the use and the means to acquire these weapons does go hand in hand with the morality of possession, because in order to possess something, it has to be made, and there has to be a demand to use it, or a potential to use it. In practice, a higher demand or desire for an object means that there's going to be more possession overall, and that increases their manufacturing. Nuclear weapons, also referred to as nukes, are bombs or missiles, basically any type of weapon, that use nuclear energy to create some kind of explosion. And nuclear energy, as a technical side note, is the immense energy that's released by splitting, which is fission, or combining, fusion of atoms. And the word immoral simply means not moral, with the exact definitions and framework differing between different rounds. But immoral just means not moral, and the affirmative is basically defending that possessing nuclear weapons is immoral. So to talk about the main affirmative ground, while there are many different contentions and ways you can organize the arguments on this slide, as well as different avenues of research you can take, the two main sort of areas that you should look into are first, existential risk. This is simply the argument that nuclear weapons, when used, can kill people at extreme levels of magnitude, and this is extinction level risks. They could cause nuclear winters, they could basically lead to extinction. Billions of people could die if large countries do release large amounts of nukes. In addition, these existential risks and the use of nukes don't just happen in an all-out war. They could happen because of accidental launches, which could be caused by miscalculations, and power imbalances can devastate entire countries. Currently, the possession of nuclear weapons is imbalanced, with countries like America, Russia, and China having many more nukes in their possession and in their arsenal than countries like India, Pakistan, Israel, North Korea. And apart from 9 countries, the remaining hundreds of other countries in the world don't have any nukes. Many are trying to develop them, or at least have the capacities to develop them, but the vast majority don't have nuclear arsenals. So that does make the possession of nuclear weapons very imbalanced and does give a lot of extra power to some countries, while other ones are at the mercy of their allies, hoping that they're allied with bigger countries. The impact of this, as I mentioned earlier, are nuclear winter, extinction, and widespread disaster that could devastate billions of people. Another affirmative argument, which is a bit preemptive to the negative, as you'll see in a bit, is that deterrence fails. Deterrence is basically the act of deterring something, is the act of stopping it or preventing it before it happens. So deterrence is the idea that having nukes, basically many countries owning nukes, would deter nuclear war, or would prevent it because of something called mutually assured destruction. These countries know, for America, for example, knows that if it nukes Russia, then Russia's going to nuke them back. And America doesn't want to be nuked, so it's not going to take that first step of nuking Russia. We'll see this more on the next slide, but the preemptive argument is that countries will still fight and engage in conflict, even with the risk of nuclear war. So even if America is aware of mutually assured destruction and chooses not to nuke Russia, there's still a chance that a big country like America could still engage in some type of conflict. And there's several recent examples of violence and skirmishes between nuclear powers, such as India, Pakistan, Russia, Ukraine, and Israel, Iran, that one happening through proxy groups. And as I mentioned earlier, the possession of nukes is imbalanced, so larger actors like Russia and the United States are miles ahead of their counterparts. So a larger country like Russia or the United States, they could choose to attack a much smaller country that doesn't have nukes. And in that case, the concept of deterrence would fail, because America is largely able to guarantee that that smaller country won't be able to send nukes or nuke America back. Now, to talk about the main negative ground, one of the key and crucial negative arguments is deterrence, which is evidenced by the fact that nuclear weapons haven't been used for 81 years, the first and only time being in Japan, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where the United States used nuclear weapons. And this is at least partly because of mutually assured destruction, often abbreviated as MAD, because countries are very hesitant to use nukes. They know that the opposition will counter with nukes as well. Now, I mentioned in the last slide that a large country like the United States or Russia can very well choose to nuke a smaller country because they know that that smaller country cannot retaliate with nuclear weapons. But this is where alliances become important. If the United States, for example, was to nuke a very small country because of some conflict or some other reason, even if that smaller country doesn't have nukes, that smaller country could very well be allied with Russia or China. And Russia or China could send their nukes to that allied country, and that allied country all of a sudden would have a lot more power and the ability to counter the United States, which is why we haven't had nuclear weapons used in 81 years, 8 decades, because even the largest countries like the United States and Russia, in terms of nuclear arsenals, know that there's a risk of them being countered with nuclear war. Another main negative argument, which could come up through counterplans, even though the resolution isn't a plan-based resolution, is that regulations can solve. Currently, the risk of nuclear war is not at an all-time high, which is up to debate, but it is it is a non-zero risk. So there is a chance that we do have a non-zero chance that some kind of nuclear conflict could break out in the next few years, especially given that there are a lot of geopolitical tensions across the world. So one of the main negative arguments explaining why these tensions being high is not a reason why possessing nukes is immoral is because regulations can solve. There are many different international cooperation agreements and treaties that prevent nuclear conflict. Some of these treaties, both legally binding and non-legally binding, can prevent new testing, they can limit stockpiles to safer amounts, and they can encourage non-proliferation. So instead of building up nuclear arsenals aggressively in a race, as we saw in the Cold War, instead, many different international treaties and organizations are calling for countries to decrease their nuclear arsenals or at least not test them so that there isn't a risk of nuclear war and nuclear war doesn't seem to be on the horizon. Instead, it just seems like a distant or unrealistic thing that the world isn't going to engage in. So those are the main negative arguments. Of course, there are different avenues for research for both the negative and the affirmative. This was definitely not a comprehensive topic analysis, but we did cover the overall main aff and neg arguments for this topic. If you have any questions, comments, or any additional pieces of analysis that you'd like to add, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and thank you for watching.